Elias Thorne thought he had grown used to life pinning him against the wall, raising a 6-year-old daughter alone, drowning in debt, working a job that barely kept them afloat. But that morning, when he was summoned to the 36th floor to meet the most powerful woman in the company, everything went far beyond the fear of being fired. Vivian Sterling did not fire him. She looked him straight in the eye and made an offer that would crack his life wide open. She needed him to pretend to be her husband for 1 year. Elias froze his mind, catching on the only question that seemed to matter, half joking, half deadly serious. "So, we're sharing a bed." And that was when the real trouble began. The Monday night that changed everything started like all the others. Elias hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of the nearly empty office at 8:45, typing another forgettable tagline for a product no one would remember by morning. The screen blurred as exhaustion pressed against the back of his eyes. 3 years of this. 3 years since Sarah died and left him with a 6-year-old, a mountain of medical bills, and a life held together with duct tape and desperation. His phone buzzed on the corner of his desk. The screen read Marlo Finch. He swiped it open and heard the tired voice of the daycare teacher on the other end, telling him Briar had a fever of 101 and needed to be picked up early the next morning if it did not break by then. He promised he would be there. He always was. Elias hung up and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his palms. The kind of exhaustion that came from juggling too many things at once and dropping most of them. He saved the document, shut down his computer, and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he walked through rows of empty cubicles toward the elevator bank. Most people had left hours ago. He turned the corner too fast and collided with someone coming the other way. A leather portfolio slipped from her hands and hit the polished tile floor with a sharp crack. Papers scattered in a wide arc across the hallway. Elias dropped to his knees immediately, his pulse spiking with embarrassment. The woman crouched across from him, her movements precise and controlled, each gesture deliberate. He looked up and recognition hit him like cold water. Vivian Sterling, 29 years old, CEO of Sterling Marketing Group, the kind of person who did not make small talk in the break room and did not need to. She was cold in the way that powerful people often were, and she rarely spoke to anyone below the executive floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a flawless twist, her suit tailored to the kind of perfection that cost more than Elias made in a month. They reached for the portfolio at the same time. Their hands did not touch, but the air between them felt tight, charged with the awkwardness of unequal worlds colliding. Elias handed her the folder and stood pulling himself to his full height. Vivian straightened across from him, her expression unreadable, a mask that gave nothing away. She thanked him without warmth, the words clipped and formal, then turned to leave. That should have been the end of it. But it was not, because Elias noticed something she had missed, a sealed envelope, cream-colored and embossed, half hidden beneath a filing cabinet near the wall. He picked it up and called out to her. Vivian stopped mid-stride, turned back with a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Elias jogged toward her, holding the envelope out like it might explode if he held it too long. She took it from him and opened her purse, pulling out 5 crisp $100 bills. She held the money toward him, her expression expectant. Elias stared at the cash, then at her face, reading the assumption written there. He shook his head and took a step back. "I was just returning something that wasn't mine. I don't need to be paid for that." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she had not expected to encounter. She asked if he was sure. He said he was. Then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the fluorescent-lit hallway with the money still in her hand. A woman who had just met someone who did not want anything from her. Elias did not know that Vivian Sterling did not forget things like that. She went back to her office on the 36th floor and pulled up the employee directory on her desktop. The search took less than a minute. Elias Thorne, 34 years old, copywriter, lower tier. Single father. Financial history strained to the breaking point. $127,000 in medical debt from his late wife's illness, 2 months behind on rent. No college degree, trade school, and a handful of community college courses. Daughter named Briar, 6 years old, enrolled in subsidized daycare. No corporate alliances, no connections to her brother Donovan. Elias Thorne was clean, unremarkable, and desperate. Vivian leaned back in her leather chair and considered the pieces falling into place. Donovan had been circling her position for years, quietly dismantling everything she tried to build, waiting for her to fail, so he could step in and claim what he believed was rightfully his. Their father had groomed Donovan from the age of 16 to take over Sterling marketing, and then the old man had died and left the company to Vivian anyway, with one impossible condition attached. She needed someone she could control, someone who had no reason to refuse, someone who would not draw attention or raise suspicion. Elias Thorne fit the profile perfectly. She picked up her phone and called her lawyer. I found him. 7 days later, Elias received an email from Human Resources. The subject line was vague. Meeting request, but the body made his stomach drop. He was being summoned to the 36th floor at 9 in the morning. No explanation, no context, just a calendar invite with Vivian Sterling's name attached to it. Elias read it 3 times, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. His mind raced through every interaction he had had with anyone remotely connected to the executive team, searching for the mistake that had finally caught up with him. That night, he sat in Briar's room and watched her sleep. She was small for her age, her breathing seared and steady beneath the dinosaur print comforter. The nightlight on her dresser cast shadows across the walls. He thought about the life he was giving her, the cramped apartment, the second-hand clothes, the constant fear that one bad month would put them on the street. He thought about the stack of medical bills on the kitchen counter, the ones he had stopped opening because knowing the exact number did not change anything. He thought about his own father, the man who had walked out when Elias was 12, leaving behind nothing but unpaid gambling debts and the smell of whiskey. Elias had sworn he would never become that. But sitting here in the dark, watching his daughter sleep, he wondered how much longer he could keep that promise. Briar stirred and opened her eyes halfway, blinking up at him. "Daddy, you're coming back tomorrow, right? You won't disappear." Her voice was small and worried, the fear of a child who had already lost one parent and could not bear to lose another. Elias leaned down and kissed her forehead, his throat tight. "I always come back, sweetheart. Always. I promise." She asked him to cross his heart. He did, tracing an X over his chest with his finger. "Cross my heart and hope to always come back." She smiled and closed her eyes, slipping back into sleep. Elias sat there for another 10 minutes, then got up and went to the closet to iron the only suit he owned that still fit. The fabric was thin at the elbows, the cuffs frayed, but it would have to do. The next morning at 8:55, Elias stepped off the elevator onto the 36th floor. The space was all glass and steel, sharp edges and cold light, the kind of environment designed to remind you that you did not belong. A receptionist directed him to a conference room at the end of the hall. He walked in and found Vivian sitting at the head of a long table, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat down and folded his hands on the table, trying to look calm even though his pulse was hammering in his ears. Vivian did not waste time. She told him she had reviewed his employment record and found him competent, reliable, and unremarkable. Then she said something that made his stomach drop through the floor. She needed him to do something for her, something that had nothing to do with his job. Elias waited, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Vivian leaned forward slightly and explained about her father's will. The company had been left to her, but there was a clause buried in the legal language. The person in control of Sterling Marketing Solutions had to be married. If Vivian did not marry before her 30th birthday, control of the company would transfer to Donovan. Elias asked when her birthday was. Vivian's answer was cold and precise. 11 months from now. She needed a husband, not a real one. A contract, 12 months. No emotion, no complications, just a performance convincing enough to satisfy the terms of the will and keep Donovan from taking everything she had built. Elias asked why him, though part of him already knew the answer. Vivian slid a folder across the table. She had done her research, $127,000 in medical debt from his wife's illness. 2 months behind on rent, Briar's daycare fees eating up what little remained of his paycheck. Vivian could fix all of that. She could erase his debt, double his salary, provide health insurance, and set up an education fund for his daughter. All he had to do was play the role. Elias asked what playing the role meant. Vivian's voice remained steady, clinical. It meant moving into her penthouse, attending family dinners, posing for photographs, convincing Donovan and the board that they were a real couple. Elias felt the question rise in his throat before he could stop it, the one that had been sitting there since the moment she started talking. "So, we're sharing a bed." Vivian's expression did not change. Only when necessary. Only when someone who matters needs to be convinced. The air in the room felt too thin, like the oxygen had been sucked out through the ventilation system. Elias told her he needed 24 hours to think about it. Vivian said that was fine. She stood, handed him the folder with the terms written out in legal language he barely understood, and walked him to the door. Her heels clicked against the polished floor. She did not look back. That night, Elias sat in Briar's room again and watched her sleep. The nightlight cast the same shadows. The dinosaur comforter rose and fell with her breathing. He thought about the choice in front of him. He thought about what kind of father let his kid grow up poor when he had a chance to fix it. He thought about his own father, the man who had sold everything for a shot at easy money and lost it all. Elias had spent his whole life swearing he would never be that man. But sitting here now, he wondered if there was a difference between selling yourself for gambling debts and selling yourself for your daughter's future. The line felt thinner than it should have. At 3 in the morning, he picked up his phone and typed out a message. "I'll do it. But Briar stays out of this. No publicity, no involvement. She doesn't know." He hit send and set the phone down on the nightstand. It buzzed 2 minutes later. Vivian's reply was short. "Agreed." Elias closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. "I just sold myself. Smart or desperate? Probably both." 3 days later, Elias sat in a lawyer's office downtown and signed a contract that would change everything. The lawyer was a man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, his voice a monotone drone as he walked through the terms. The money would transfer in stages. The timeline was non-negotiable. The rules were explicit: no emotional attachment, no physical relationship unless required for appearances, automatic termination after 12 months. Elias's hand shook slightly as he signed his name at the bottom of the final page. Vivian signed next to him, her signature a sharp, confident slash of ink. She shook his hand when it was done. It felt like sealing a business deal, which he supposed it was. The lawyer stamped the document and noted the effective date aloud. November 15th. Termination date November 14th of the following year. Month 0 of 12 begins now. Elias moved into the penthouse on a Friday afternoon. The space was cold and immaculate, the kind of place that looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and neutral tones. Nothing about it felt lived in. Vivian showed him to a guest room at the far end of the hall. She told him the rules again, as if he might have forgotten them in the 3 days since he signed the contract. No crossing boundaries, no personal questions, no expectations beyond what was written in the agreement. Elias set his duffel bag down on the bed and looked around the room. It was bigger than his entire apartment. He felt like an intruder. The next morning, he woke to the sound of Vivian in the kitchen. He walked out to find her standing in front of an expensive espresso machine. Her expression somewhere between frustration and resignation. The machine sat silent and uncooperative. She muttered something under her breath about it being the 3rd time this month. Elias asked if he could take a look. Vivian glanced at him surprised, then gestured toward the machine. Be my guest. Elias spent 2 minutes examining the pressure gauge, the water flow, the grind settings. The pressure valve was stuck and the grind was too fine for this particular model. He found a basic toolkit in a drawer near the sink and went to work adjusting the valve, cleaning the internal components, resetting the calibration. 15 minutes later, he told her to try it. Vivian pressed the button. A perfect stream of espresso poured into the cup. She looked at him with something that might have been respect. Where did you learn that? 3 years of fixing everything myself. Couldn't afford repairmen. When you don't have a choice, you learn how to fix it or live without it. The words came out matter of fact, not bitter. Just the truth. Vivian thanked him, and for the first time since they had met, her voice carried a note of genuine appreciation. Elias shrugged and put the tools away. It was nothing. But he knew it was not nothing. It was the first time she had seen him as something other than a transaction. Later that afternoon, Elias went down to the basement to return the toolkit he had borrowed from building maintenance. He found a man in his late 50s working on the boiler. His hands dark with grease, his focus intense. The man looked up as Elias approached. You the new guy on 36? Elias hesitated. Not exactly, just staying there. The man straightened and wiped his hands on a rag. Name's Jasper. Most people call me Jazz. He gestured toward the toolbox in Elias's hands. You know how to use those, taught myself. Had to. Jazz nodded, his expression approving. Not bad for self-taught. Heard you fixed Sterling's espresso machine. Building manager mentioned it. Elias was surprised the news had traveled that fast. Jazz grinned. Information moves fast in a building like this. If you ever want to learn more heating systems, plumbing, electrical, find me down here. Spent 30 years fixing everything from ship engines to skyscrapers. Always happy to pass knowledge on. Elias thanked him, meaning it. Jazz's expression turned serious for a moment. And if you ever need to talk man to man, no judgment, doors open. Sometimes it helps to say things out loud to someone who won't repeat them. Elias felt something loosen in his chest. It had been a long time since anyone had offered him that kind of solidarity. Jazz was the kind of man who understood what it meant to work with your hands to build something from nothing, to fix what was broken because no one else would do it for you. Elias told him he appreciated it. Jazz clapped him on the shoulder and went back to the boiler. Elias climbed the stairs back to the 36th floor, feeling like maybe he had found an ally in this strange new world. Sunday afternoon arrived with all the weight of an execution. Vivian told Elias they had a family dinner at the Sterling estate. Her tone was neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. They drove out to Connecticut in silence, the landscape shifting from city to suburbs to old money estates hidden behind iron gates. The Sterling house was massive, all stone and ivy. The kind of place that had been built to remind people of their place in the world. Donovan Sterling was waiting inside, leaning against the bar in the great room with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was 35, tall and confident, his smile sharp and practiced. He walked over when he saw them and extended his hand to Elias. The handshake was too tight, the kind of grip meant to test, to intimidate. This is a surprise, didn't know Vivian was seeing anyone. Vivian's voice was cool. We kept it quiet. Donovan's smile did not reach his eyes. How did you two meet at the office? Elias kept his answer short, trying not to give anything away. Donovan raised an eyebrow. And what do you do there? Vivian cut in before Elias could respond. Elias works in marketing. Donovan's gaze lingered on Elias, searching for the lie, the crack in the facade. Interesting. I always thought Vivian would end up with someone from our circle. Someone who understands the family business from the inside. Dinner was stiff and formal, every word chosen carefully, every gesture calculated. Elias sat beside Vivian, his hand resting on the back of her chair the way a husband would. At one point, Vivian placed her hand over his, a brief touch that looked natural but felt rehearsed. Donovan watched them from across the table, his expression thoughtful, assessing. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, asked Elias where he had studied. The question landed like a stone in still water. Elias hesitated. I didn't go to university. Trade school. Some courses at community college. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Vivian's voice cut through it, cold and sharp. Elias wrote the tagline for our Q4 campaign. Increased click-through rates by 34%. I'd say results matter more than credentials. Elias was surprised she knew the numbers. She had done her research, learned the details of his work, armed herself with facts. It was the first time he realized she saw him as more than just a name on a contract. The board member nodded, but the judgment in his eyes did not fade. On the drive back to the city, Vivian did not speak. When they got back to the penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window looking out at the lights below. Elias asked if she thought they had pulled it off. Vivian did not turn around. Donovan doesn't believe us. Her voice was tired, the kind of tired that came from fighting too long and not knowing why you were still standing. Elias asked how she knew. Because Donovan never believes anything I do is real. She turned to face him, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw past the armor. Donovan's always been the favorite. Father groomed him to take over from the time he was 16. I was an afterthought. And then Father died and left the company to me anyway. With one impossible condition attached. Donovan's never forgiven me for it. Elias said he was sorry. Vivian looked at him like she did not know what to do with the apology. She finished her wine and said goodnight. Elias stayed in the living room for another hour, thinking about the woman who had bought his loyalty and wondering if she had ever had anyone in her life who had given it to her for free. That night, lying in the guest room bed, Elias stared at the ceiling and thought about the 12 months ahead of him. He thought about Briar asleep in their old apartment with a babysitter he had hired for the weekend. He thought about Vivian standing alone by the window, her silhouette sharp against the city lights. He thought about Donovan's calculating gaze and the way the board members had looked at him like he was an intruder in their world. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. It did not come easily. The first 2 weeks in the penthouse felt like living in a museum where Elias was both the exhibit and the security guard. Vivian left for the office before he woke up and returned after he had already eaten dinner alone at the kitchen island. They exchanged maybe 10 sentences a day, most of them logistical. That was the extent of their marriage. Elias spent his evenings on the couch flipping through television channels he did not care about, waiting for the clock to tell him it was acceptable to go to bed. On weekends, he went back to his old apartment to see Briar. Those were the only hours that felt real. Briar would run to him the moment he walked through the door, her small arms wrapping around his legs, her voice bright with relief. "Daddy, you smell different, like fancy soap in big buildings." Elias would scoop her up and hold her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the weight of her trust settle over him like a blanket. She asked if he was living somewhere else. He told her it was just for work, just for a little while. She made him promise he was not disappearing like Mommy had. He knelt down and looked her in the eye, his voice steady even though his heart was breaking. "Never, sweetheart. I will never disappear. Daddy's here, always." She asked him to cross his heart. He did, tracing the X over his chest again, the same gesture he had made a dozen times before. It never got easier. 3 weeks after he moved in, Vivian told him they had another family dinner. This one was different. It was at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wore white gloves and the menu did not list prices. Donovan would be there along with 2 other board members. Vivian said they needed to be convincing. Elias felt the weight of that word settle in his stomach. Convincing meant performing. Convincing meant crossing lines they had agreed not to cross. They arrived 15 minutes early. Vivian wore a black dress that looked expensive and unforgiving. Elias wore the same suit he had worn to sign the contract. Vivian told him to relax. He said he was relaxed. She said he looked like he was about to be interrogated. He said that was because he was. Donovan arrived exactly on time, flanked by two older men in tailored suits. He greeted Vivian with a kiss on the cheek that looked affectionate but felt like a threat. Then he turned to Elias and extended his hand. The performance had begun. Donovan asked how married life was treating them. Vivian said it was an adjustment. One of the board members, the man with silver hair and the voice like gravel, asked Elias what he did at the company. Elias said he was a copywriter. The man asked if that was how he and Vivian had met. Elias said yes. Vivian reached across the table and placed her hand over his. We kept it quiet, didn't want office gossip. Donovan watched the whole exchange without saying a word. When the appetizers arrived, he finally spoke again. I always thought Vivian would end up with someone from our circle, someone who understands the family business. Vivian's response was sharp and controlled. Elias understands more than you give him credit for, Donovan. Sometimes outsiders see things insiders miss. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his smile thin. Perhaps, but the company isn't kind to people who don't belong. The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Elias felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest. This was what the next 12 months would look like. Constant scrutiny, constant judgment, constant waiting for the moment when the performance slipped and everything fell apart. By the time they left the restaurant, Elias's jaw hurt from clenching it. Vivian did not speak on the drive home. When they got back to the penthouse, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window again. The same spot she always chose when she needed to think. Elias asked if she thought they had pulled it off. Vivian did not turn around. Donovan doesn't believe us. She turned to face him, and the exhaustion in her eyes was deeper than before. Not just physically tired. Tired in the way people get when they have been fighting too long and are not sure why they are still standing. Elias did not know what to say, so he said nothing. Vivian finished her wine and said good night. Elias stayed in the living room thinking about the woman who had everything except the one thing she needed most. Someone who believed in her without conditions. 4 weeks into the arrangement, Donovan Sterling sat in a bar on the Lower East Side, the kind of place where cash moved quietly and questions were not asked. The investigator across from him had an unremarkable face, the type that disappeared in a crowd by design. Donovan slid an envelope across the table, his fingers drumming once against the scarred wood. I need everything on Elias Thorne. Financial records, phone logs, who he talks to, where he goes. The investigator opened the envelope and counted the bills inside without expression. How deep do you want me to go? Donovan leaned back, his whiskey catching the low light. Deep enough to prove my sister's marriage is a fraud. I want the contract, I want the paper trail, I want proof she paid him off. The investigator nodded and pocketed the money. That'll take time. Donovan's smile was thin and cold. You have 3 months. Make it count. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt more like coexistence than marriage. Elias and Vivian moved through the penthouse like ghosts, occupying the same space, their paths crossing only when necessity demanded it. She worked late every night, the glow from her office visible under the door long after midnight. He sat in the living room with the television on, not watching, just filling the silence with noise. The only warmth in his life came from the weekends when he crossed the city to see Briar, scooping her up in the small apartment that still smelled like home, reading her dinosaur books until she fell asleep in his arms. Every Sunday night when he left, she made him promise again. You're coming back, right? Always, sweetheart, always. The crossing his heart gesture had become a ritual between them, a fragile promise against the fear that lived in her 6-year-old heart. February arrived with a storm that knocked out power across 3 neighborhoods. The penthouse went dark at 10 on a Wednesday night, the hum of electricity cutting off mid-breath. Elias was in the living room when it happened, the sudden blackness pressing against his eyes. He heard footsteps in the hall, and then saw the glow of a phone screen as Vivian emerged from her office. Her face was pale in the artificial light, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe twist. She looked younger like this, less guarded, almost vulnerable. Elias found 2 wine glasses in the cabinet and poured from the bottle she kept on the counter. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the darkness between them somehow easier than the fluorescent honesty of electric light. The silence stretched for several minutes before Vivian spoke. "Why did you really agree to this?" Her voice was soft, genuinely curious rather than interrogating. Elias took a long drink before answering. "You already know why." She shook her head, the movement barely visible in the dim glow of their phones. "I know what the contract says. I want to know what you were thinking when you signed it." Elias set his glass down and leaned his head back against the couch. "I was thinking about Briar, about what kind of father lets his kid grow up poor when he has a chance to fix it." He paused, the next words harder to say. "But I was also scared. My father left us when I was 12. Gambling debts. He sold everything, the house, my mom's jewelry, his integrity. I always swore I'd never be like him. And here I am selling myself for money." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "Do you regret it?" Elias did not answer right away. The question hung between them, heavier than he expected. "Don't know yet. Ask me in 12 months. He turned the question back on her. "Do you?" Vivian's laugh was bitter and brief. "No. I'd do whatever it takes to keep Donovan from winning." She shifted on the couch, drawing her legs up under her, making herself smaller. "Donovan's always been the golden child. Smart, charismatic, everything father wanted. I was invisible until it was convenient. The daughter he trotted out for appearances. Then he died and left everything to me. Not because he believed in me, but because he wanted to punish Donovan for something. I've spent 3 years trying to prove I deserve it, that I'm good enough." Her voice dropped, almost too quiet to hear. "Sometimes I think my mother was right. Maybe I'll never be good enough." Elias heard the crack in her armor, the vulnerability she would never show in daylight. He told her about Sarah, about the last 6 months in the hospital when the bills came faster than he could count them. About watching her slip away and knowing he could not save her. That kind of powerlessness, it changes you. Makes you desperate in ways you don't expect. Vivian listened without interrupting, her profile sharp against the city lights filtering through the windows. They talked for 2 hours, their voices low and careful, trading pieces of themselves in the dark. When the power came back on, the sudden brightness made them both flinch. Vivian stood and smoothed her clothes, the professional mask snapping back into place. "I should get back to work." She stopped at the doorway and looked back at him. "Thank you." Elias did not ask what for. He knew she was not thanking him for the conversation. She was thanking him for seeing her as human. The following Saturday, Elias mentioned over breakfast that he was taking Briar to the park. Vivian surprised him by asking if she could come. She wanted to see what his life looked like outside the penthouse walls. Elias hesitated, thinking of all the ways this could complicate things, then nodded. Riverside Park at 2. Vivian arrived in jeans and a cable knit sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup softening her features. She looked like a different person, someone who might shop at farmers markets and laugh at bad jokes. Briar was on the swings when she spotted Vivian approaching. The little girl slowed her momentum and jumped off, landing with practiced ease. She walked up to Vivian with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Who are you?" Elias started to answer, but Vivian knelt down to Briar's eye level first. "I'm a friend of your daddy's." Briar tilted her head, studying Vivian's face with disconcerting intensity. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" The question landed like a stone. Elias felt his heart stop. Vivian's composure slipped for just a second, then she smiled. "I am." Briar's next question was immediate and merciless. "Are you gonna be my new mom?" Panic flashed in Vivian's eyes, her gaze darting to Elias for help. He knelt down beside them. "That's not how it works, honey." Briar shrugged with the easy acceptance of the very young. Okay. She turned and ran back toward the swings, the moment already forgotten. Elias and Vivian stood slowly, both of them shaken by different things. They walked along the edge of the pond while Briar raced ahead, chasing pigeons and laughing at nothing in particular. Vivian asked what Briar knew about the arrangement. Elias's answer was firm. Nothing. And it's staying that way. She's 6. She doesn't need to know her father's in a fake marriage. Vivian nodded. That's probably wise. She watched Briar for a long moment, something wistful crossing her face. She's lucky to have you. Elias felt his throat tighten. I'm the lucky one. A gust of wind caught Briar's kite and sent it spiraling into the branches of an oak tree. She called for help, her voice rising with frustration. Elias walked over and studied the situation, then started climbing. The bark was rough under his hands, the branches solid and familiar. He had done this 100 times before, fixing gutters and clearing debris from roofs when landlords refused to pay for proper maintenance. He reached the kite and untangled the string, then climbed back down and handed it to his daughter. Briar threw her arms around his legs. Thanks, Daddy. Vivian was watching when he turned around. You're not afraid of heights. Elias wiped his hands on his jeans. Fixed roofs for 3 years after Sarah got sick. Needed the extra money. Height's just height. Falling's the problem. They stayed at the park for another hour. Vivian sat on a bench and watched Briar play, her expression unreadable but her eyes tracking every movement the little girl made. Elias sat beside her, not speaking, just existing in the same space. When it was time to go, Vivian stood abruptly. I should head back. Thank you for letting me come. She walked away without looking back, but Elias had seen the longing in her face, the way she had watched Briar, like someone looking at something they were never allowed to want. That night, lying in bed, Elias thought about Vivian's expression at the park. He thought about the life she might have had if she had been allowed to want things that were not tied to power or legacy. He thought about the way she had looked at his daughter, not with polite detachment, but with something that looked like hunger. It made him wonder what she had given up to become the woman everyone expected her to be. 2 weeks later, Vivian informed him they needed wedding photos. The family needed proof, something tangible to show at dinners and board meetings. Elias agreed because he had no choice. They met at a studio downtown on a Saturday afternoon. The photographer was a middle-aged woman with efficient hands and a professional smile. She positioned them in front of a white backdrop and gave instructions in a steady stream. Stand closer. Look at each other. Smile like you mean it. Hold hands. Vivian's hand was cold in his, her fingers stiff and reluctant. Rest your head on his shoulder. She did, and Elias caught the scent of her perfume, something floral and expensive. Put your arm around her waist. Elias hesitated. Vivian whispered without moving her lips. It's fine. He slid his arm around her waist and she leaned into him, her body fitting against his side in a way that should have felt awkward but somehow did not. The photographer told them to look at each other. They turned their heads, faces inches apart, and Elias saw past the mask for the second time. Fear lived in her eyes, the same fear he felt every time he thought about the months still stretching ahead. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. The camera shutter clicked. Vivian stepped back immediately, the moment shattering like dropped glass. The professional mask slammed back into place. She thanked the photographer and walked out without waiting for him. In the car on the drive home, neither of them spoke. The silence was different this time, charged with something neither wanted to name. When they got back to the penthouse, Vivian went straight to her office and closed the door. Elias sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the way her body had felt against his, the way her eyes had looked when the mask slipped. The lines they had drawn were not as clear as either of them had thought, and that was dangerous. Jazz found Elias in the basement the following week. The older man was working on the heating system, his hands dark with grease, his focus absolute. He looked up when Elias approached. Come to help or learn both? Jazz grinned and handed him a wrench. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Jazz explaining the intricacies of pressure valves and gas lines. Elias listening and asking questions when he did not understand. Jazz straightened after a particularly stubborn bolt finally gave way. Machines are like relationships. You treat them right, maintain them regular, they run smooth for decades. Ignore the warning signs, let problems build up, they blow up in your face when you least expect it. Elias laughed despite himself. Jazz's expression turned serious. You're in something complicated, aren't you? Heard talk around the building. Elias tensed. What kind of talk? Jazz shrugged. That you married the CEO suddenly? Nobody saw it coming. Elias did not know what to say. Jazz clapped him on the shoulder. Listen, I don't know what's going on, don't need to know. But I learned something in 30 years of work. Integrity is the only thing no one can take from you. Guard it, because once it's gone, you can't get it back. The words settled over Elias like a weight and a comfort at the same time. Jazz met his eyes. And if you need to talk man to man, no judgment, I'm here. Sometimes it helps to say things out loud to someone who won't repeat them. Elias nodded, throat tight. I appreciate that. Late February bled into early March. The investigator Donovan had hired was making progress piecing together the timeline of Elias's debt payments, tracking his movements, building a case brick by brick. Donovan received weekly updates in sealed envelopes delivered to his new office across town. Each report brought him closer to the proof he needed. He was patient. He had waited this long. He could wait a little longer. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Elias's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. Donovan's voice was smooth and controlled. Elias, we should talk. Just the two of us. Elias felt ice slide down his spine. About what Donovan's laugh was soft, about the situation you're in. I think I can help. They agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the Lower East Side the next day. Elias told Vivian about the call that night. She listened without expression, then disappeared into her office and returned with a small recording device. He'll try to buy you off or threaten you. Record everything, just in case. The coffee shop was crowded and loud, the perfect cover for a private conversation. Donovan was already seated in a corner booth when Elias arrived. He looked relaxed, confident, a man holding all the cards. Elias slid into the seat across from him and waited. Donovan stirred his coffee slowly. I appreciate you coming. I'll be direct. I know Vivian hired you. I know about your debt. I know about the contract. Elias's blood went cold. Donovan leaned forward. I don't blame you for taking the deal. You're a father. You did what you had to do. But I also know this isn't going to end well. Vivian's unstable. She's been under too much pressure for too long. When she falls, and she will fall, you're going to fall with her. Donovan's voice dropped lower, intimate and conspiratorial. I'm offering you a way out. Walk away now. I'll make sure the contract stays buried. No one will ever know. You keep whatever money she's already given you. Go back to your life, move on. All you have to do is disappear. It's the smart play, the safe play. He paused, letting the offer sink in. Think about Briar. She needs a father who's stable, not someone about to be caught up in scandal. Elias felt his hands curl into fists under the table. And if I don't, Donovan's smile faded. Then you'll regret it. I guarantee that. He stood and dropped cash on the table. You have 48 hours. Think carefully. Then he walked out, leaving Elias alone with the weight of the decision pressing down on his chest. Elias sat in the booth for a long time after Donovan left. He thought about the offer, about the easy escape it represented. He thought about Briar and the stable life Donovan had promised. He thought about going back to the cramped apartment and the endless bills and the fear that never quite went away. It would be so easy to walk away, to take the money and run, to let Vivian face Donovan alone. But then he thought about her standing by the window in the dark, exhausted and alone, fighting a battle she did not know how to win. He thought about the way she had looked at Briar in the park, like someone trying to remember what it felt like to want something simple. He thought about Jazz's words. Integrity is the only thing no one can take from you. If he ran now, he would be no better than his father, a man who sold out when things got hard. Elias pulled out his phone and called Vivienne. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the meeting, about Donovan's offer, about the 48-hour deadline. There was a long silence on the other end. "What did you say?" Elias took a breath. "I said no, because Donovan's wrong. This isn't going to end with us falling. It's going to end with us still standing." Vivian's voice cracked slightly. "Why? Why are you staying?" Elias looked out the coffee shop window at the people passing by, all of them living their own complicated lives. "Because for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm fighting for something that matters. Not just surviving. Fighting." Another silence, longer this time. Then Vivian spoke, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "Thank you." Elias shook his head even though she could not see it. "You don't need to thank me. I made my choice." That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay in bed thinking about what he had committed himself to, about the target he had just painted on his back. Donovan was not the kind of man who accepted no for an answer. The next move would come soon, and it would not be gentle. But lying there in the dark, Elias felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not peace exactly, but something close to purpose. He had made a choice based on who he wanted to be rather than what he was afraid of losing. That had to count for something. 2 days later, Vivian gave Elias access to her internal files. "If Donovan's going after us, we need to be ready." She showed him how to navigate the company's document management system, where to find email archives and calendar records. Elias spent hours going through the files, his eyes burning from screen fatigue. He was not looking for anything specific at first. Just trying to understand the landscape of the company, the power dynamics that Vivian navigated every day. But then he noticed something odd. Timestamps on Vivian's calendar events that did not match her actual access times. Email read receipts from accounts that were not hers. Elias had worked part-time IT support the year after Sarah died, taking night shifts to cover the mounting bills. He knew how to read audit trails, how to track who accessed what and when. He dug deeper, cross-referencing email logs with access records, building a timeline of unauthorized entry. The pattern was clear once he knew what to look for. Donovan's executive credentials had been used to monitor Vivian's emails, her calendar, her internal communications, months of systematic surveillance. Elias printed everything, building a stack of evidence that grew thicker with each passing hour. Email logs, access records, exact timestamps showing when Donovan had accessed information he had no authorization to view. He brought the stack to Vivian's office just after midnight. She was still working, her desk lamp casting shadows across her face. Elias set the papers down in front of her. "Donovan's been spying on you." Vivian looked up, confusion flickering across her features before she started reading. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, not with fear but with fury. "This is corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty." Elias nodded. "This is your ammunition. He can prove you have a contract marriage. You can prove he's been breaking corporate law for months." Vivian looked at him, something like wonder in her eyes. "How did you find this? I've had it teams looking at our security for months." Elias shrugged. "They were looking for external threats. I looked for internal ones. Sometimes the biggest dangers come from inside." The email arrived in Vivian's inbox 3 days later, copied to the entire board. The subject line read, "Emergency Board Meeting, Critical Leadership Concerns." The body was brief and professional, Donovan's voice stripped of emotion. "Matters requiring immediate board attention regarding executive integrity and corporate governance." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning, floor 40. Vivian read it 3 times, her face carefully blank. Elias watched her from across the table. He found something, or thinks he did. Vivian's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "This is it." This is where Donovan makes his move. Elias did not hesitate. I'm coming. Vivian shook her head. You don't have to. His voice was firm. If Donovan's going to burn us both, I want to be in the room when it happens. We go down together or we don't go down at all. Vivian looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Okay. The word was quiet, but it carried weight. They had 9 days to prepare. The night before the board meeting, Elias could not sleep. At 3 in the morning, he gave up and walked to the living room windows. Staring out at the city lights that never dimmed, he heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Vivian standing in the doorway. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and pajama pants, her hair loose, glasses perched on her nose. He had never seen her wear glasses before. She looked impossibly young and impossibly tired. Couldn't sleep. Her voice was rough with exhaustion. Elias shook his head. Me neither. She walked over and stood beside him at the window, both of them looking out at the sleeping city. The silence stretched between them, comfortable in its weight. Are you scared? The question came out before Elias could stop it. Vivian's laugh was hollow. Yes. Tomorrow Donovan's going to stand in front of the board and tell them I'm a fraud. I've spent my entire life trying to prove I'm good enough to my father, to the board, to myself. And maybe my mother was right all along. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I never was. Elias heard the break in her voice, the core of doubt that had been eating at her for years. You're not a fraud. She turned to look at him, her eyes wet behind the glasses. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what they believe. What are you going to do? Vivian's shoulders sagged. Tell the truth. Admit the contract. Remind them my father's will was archaic and controlling, that I've run this company better than Donovan ever could. Will it work? Probably not, but it's the only move I have left. Elias felt something shift inside him, a certainty settling into place. I'm not letting you do this alone. Vivian's mask fell away completely, leaving only the raw vulnerability underneath. Why are you still here, Elias? Why didn't you take Donovan's offer when you had the chance? Elias turned to face her fully, the city lights painting shadows across both their faces. Maybe because I'm tired of running. I spent 3 years watching Sarah die and feeling powerless to stop it. This is the first time in a long time that I actually feel like I can fight for something. For someone. Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. You're going to lose. Maybe, but at least I'll lose standing up, and that's worth more than safety. She smiled, then sad and genuine. You're either very brave or very stupid. My money's on stupid. They both laughed, the sound breaking the tension for just a moment. Then they stood together at the window, not speaking, just waiting for the dawn that would bring everything crashing down. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of an execution. Elias and Vivian rode the elevator to the 40th floor in silence, the numbers climbing on the display like a countdown to judgment. The doors opened onto a space designed to intimidate, glass walls offering nowhere to hide. Leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars, a conference table long enough to seat 20. 7 board members were already seated when they entered. Wallace Grayson sat at the head, his silver hair immaculate, his hawk eyes tracking their every movement. Donovan occupied a chair on the opposite side, his posture relaxed, his expression that of a man who had already won. Vivian and Elias took their seats together, facing the assembled board like defendants at trial. Grayson folded his hands on the polished wood. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have concerns that need addressing regarding leadership stability. He turned his gaze to Donovan. The floor is yours. Donovan stood, slowly adjusting his cufflinks with practiced ease. I want to start by saying, I have nothing but respect for my sister. Vivian has worked hard, brought some innovative ideas to the table, but recently I became aware of information that suggests she hasn't been entirely forthcoming with this board about her personal life. He opened a leather portfolio and began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. The contract, 12 pages of legal language with signatures highlighted in yellow. Financial transfer records showing $127,000 wired to pay Elias's debts 2 days after the contract was signed. A timeline mapping the dates with damning clarity, surveillance photographs of Elias leaving his old apartment with packed bags moving into the penthouse building, employee records showing his position, salary, and the suspicious promotion that followed his marriage. Vivian hired Elias Thorne to play the role of her husband. Donovan's voice carried across the room with rehearsed authority. To satisfy the terms of our father's will so she could maintain control of Sterling Marketing. It's fraud, plain and simple, manipulation of the highest order. And it calls into question both her integrity and her fitness to lead this company. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room turned to Vivian. Elias felt the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical force. Vivian stood, her movements deliberate and controlled, her hands folded calmly on the table in front of her. She met Donovan's eyes without flinching. My brother is correct. The gasps around the room were audible. I entered into a contractual marriage with Elias Thorne. I paid his debts. I asked him to pose as my husband for 1 year. All of that is true. That is... She paused, letting the admission settle. And I'm not apologizing for it. The problem isn't that I hired Elias. Her voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. The problem is that our father wrote a will that treats marriage like a qualification for leadership. It's archaic, insulting, and fundamentally sexist. He never questioned whether Donovan could run this company without a wife, but somehow my marital status determines my competence. She turned to face the board directly. I've spent 3 years increasing revenue by 38%. We expanded into 2 new markets. Our client retention rate is the highest in company history. Sterling Marketing Solutions is now one of the most respected firms in the industry. Would any of that have been possible if Donovan were in charge? Donovan's response was immediate. That's not the point, Vivian. The point is you lied to this board, to our family, to everyone. Vivian's laugh was cold. I played the game I was forced to play. Donovan leaned forward, his knuckles white against the table. You broke the rules. Vivian's eyes flashed. The rules were broken from the start, and the men who wrote them never intended for women like me to win. Elias stood. The movement drew every eye in the room to him. Grayson's expression shifted to one of irritation. Mr. Thorne, is this relevant? Elias's voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. It is, sir. 2 weeks ago, Donovan Sterling came to me with an offer. He said he knew about the contract, knew about my debt. He offered me money to walk away from Vivian, promised to bury the contract if I disappeared. He tried to bribe me into abandoning her so he could expose this without interference. Donovan's face went rigid. That's a lie. Elias pulled out his phone and opened the recording app. The playback was crystal clear in the silent room. Donovan's voice emerged from the speaker, smooth and conspiratorial. Walk away now. I'll make sure the contract stays buried. No one will ever know. You keep whatever money she's already given you. Go back to your life, move on. All you have to do is disappear. The recording continued for another 30 seconds. Donovan's words building a damning portrait of attempted witness tampering. Elias stopped the playback and looked at Grayson. He didn't care about integrity or honesty, sir. He cared about winning. Grayson's expression had turned to stone. Is this recording accurate, Donovan? The younger man's composure cracked. It's been taken out of context. Grayson's voice was flat. It sounds fairly clear to me. A board member on his left, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. This is witness tampering at minimum, potentially obstruction. Elias continued before the moment could slip away. While reviewing Vivian's files to prepare for this meeting, I discovered something else. He pulled a thick folder from the briefcase at his feet and handed it to Grayson. Donovan has been using his executive access credentials to monitor Vivian's emails and calendar for months, tracking her meetings, reading her communications with this board, accessing her personal correspondence. It's a direct violation of company policy and a breach of fiduciary duty. Those are email logs, access records, timestamps showing exactly when Donovan accessed information he had no authorization to view. Grayson flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each sheet. The woman beside him leaned over to read along, her face registering shock. Another board member, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a professor's bearing, spoke up. "This is corporate espionage. We could be facing legal liability if this becomes public." The board member next to him nodded grimly. "This is grounds for immediate removal from any executive position." Elias felt his heart pounding but kept his voice level. "I stayed because Vivian Sterling is the best person to run this company. Contract or no contract, marriage or no marriage, she's the one who's been doing the work. I've seen her at midnight going over quarterly reports. I've watched her fight for every client, every campaign, every inch of ground. She didn't manipulate anyone. She refused to let an outdated rule destroy what she built. If this board wants to punish someone, punish the system that forced her here. A system that says a woman needs a husband to deserve leadership, that's what should be illegal, not what Vivian did to survive it." The silence that followed felt different than before. Grayson set down the folder and removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The board needs time to deliberate. Everyone except board members, please leave the room." Vivian, Elias, and Donovan filed out into the corridor. The door clicked shut behind them with finality. Donovan turned on Elias, his face twisted with rage. "You just made a very big mistake." Elias met his gaze without wavering. "I don't think so." Donovan strode away down the hall, his phone already pressed to his ear, his voice low and furious. Vivian and Elias stood in the hallway without speaking. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Other employees passed on their way to meetings, glancing at them with curiosity but saying nothing. 38 minutes after the door closed, it opened again. Grayson stepped out, his face revealing nothing. "The board has reached a decision. Donovan Sterling is being removed from his position on the board, effective immediately for ethical violations and abuse of executive access privileges. Vivian will retain her position as CEO. However, the contractual marriage must be dissolved within 30 days. The board will also be reviewing the terms of the will with legal counsel to determine if the marriage clause can be challenged or removed entirely." Grayson looked at Vivian with something that might have been respect. "It's not a perfect outcome, Ms. Sterling, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances." He turned to Elias. "You're fortunate to have someone willing to stand up for you the way Mr. Thorne did." Then he went back inside and closed the door. Vivian turned to Elias, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you." Elias shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." Vivian's voice was fierce. "I do. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to fight for me. But you did." Elias looked at her and saw the woman who had refused to apologize in that boardroom, who had stood her ground even when the floor was crumbling beneath her feet. "You would have done the same for me." They walked to the parking garage in silence, both of them processing what had just happened. At Vivian's car, she stopped and turned to face him. "The contract's over. You don't have to stay." Elias felt the words settle in his chest like stones. "I know." Vivian's voice was quiet. "Are you going to leave?" Elias looked down at his hands, at the calluses from years of manual labor, at the wedding ring he had worn for 3 months that meant nothing and everything at the same time. "I don't know yet. I need to figure out what my life looks like now that it's not dictated by a piece of paper." Vivian nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get that." She got into her car and started the engine. Before closing the door, she looked up at him one last time. "Goodbye, Elias." He watched her drive away, the taillights disappearing down the ramp, and felt something heavy settle in his chest. They had won. Donovan was gone. The company was safe, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like watching something precious slip through his fingers before he had fully understood what he was holding. 2 weeks passed in a blur of lawyers and paperwork. The contract was officially dissolved, the terms of separation drawn up with the same clinical precision as the original agreement. Elias packed his belongings on a Tuesday afternoon while Vivian was at the office. She had said goodbye the night before, standing in the doorway of his room with her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Elias had echoed the words back to her, both of them knowing they were leaving things unsaid that might never get another chance to be spoken. The old apartment felt smaller than he remembered, the walls closer together, the ceiling lower. But it was familiar, and familiarity had its own kind of comfort. Elias picked up Briar from daycare that first afternoon back, scooping her into his arms outside the building. She wrapped her legs around his waist and buried her face in his neck. "Are we going home? Home, Daddy?" "Not the big house." "Yes, sweetheart. Home, home." Briar pulled back to look at his face. "I like the lady. Will we see her again?" The question hit harder than Elias expected. "I don't know, honey." Briar's expression turned serious, the way it always did when she was testing whether the world was safe. "But you're staying with me, right? You won't leave like Mommy did." Elias knelt down on the sidewalk, not caring about the people walking around them, and took her small face in his hands. "Never. I am never leaving you. Ever. Promise, I promise. Cross my heart." He traced the X over his chest, the gesture as familiar as breathing. Briar threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. That night, Elias made spaghetti the way Briar liked it, with too much Parmesan and not enough sauce. They ate at the small kitchen table, her feet swinging beneath her chair, her voice filling the space with stories about dinosaurs and her best friend at daycare. After dinner, they sat on the couch and read 3 books about velociraptors before bedtime. Everything was the same as it had been before the contract, before Vivian, before the penthouse. Except it was not the same at all, because Elias kept thinking about the woman who had stood by the window in the dark and told him her secrets. The woman who had looked at his daughter with longing in her eyes. The woman who had bought his time but somehow ended up with pieces of his heart he had not meant to give. 3 days after moving out, Elias's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but he knew before he even opened it. The message was brief. "I want to meet, not as your boss, not as your ex-wife, just as myself. V." Elias stared at the screen for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. His heart was beating faster than it should have been. He typed back, when the response was immediate. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop on Lexington and 64th. Elias's hands were shaking as he typed his reply. "I'll be there." The coffee shop was small and eclectic, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and indie music playing too loud. Vivian was already there when Elias arrived, seated at a table by the window. She was wearing jeans and a plain white shirt. Her hair down around her shoulders, no makeup softening her features. She looked nervous. Elias had never seen her look nervous before. "Hi." Her voice was uncertain. "Hi." He sat down across from her, suddenly aware of how strange this felt, meeting her like 2 normal people instead of business partners playing roles. "I've been thinking." Vivian's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed something to hold on to. "About the last few months, about everything that happened, how it ended. And I realized something." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "I've spent so long pretending to be what everyone else needed me to be. I forgot what it felt like to just be honest. I want to try that now with you, if you're willing." Elias felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean?" Vivian took a breath. "It means no contract, no performance. No conditions, just two people who went through something strange and difficult together trying to figure out if there's something real underneath all of it. I don't know if it'll work. I don't even know if I'm capable of this kind of thing. But I want to try. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Do you? Elias looked at her across the table and saw past all the armor she had worn for so long. He saw the woman who had refused to apologize when the world demanded it, who had told him the truth in the darkness when the power went out, who had watched Briar play in the park like she was memorizing what joy looked like. He thought about walking away, about the safety of keeping his life simple and uncomplicated. But he also thought about what Jazz had told him in the basement about integrity being the only thing no one could take, and he realized that pretending he did not feel anything would be its own kind of dishonesty. Yes, I want to try. I don't know if I'm what you need, but I know I want to find out. Vivian's smile was tentative and genuine, the first real smile he had seen from her that was not tinged with sadness or exhaustion. Good. She took a sip of her coffee, then set it down with a small laugh. So, are we sharing a bed? The callback to his question from that first meeting made them both laugh, the tension breaking like a fever. Maybe, but not tonight. Fair enough. They sat for a while talking about small things that did not matter and somehow mattered more than anything else. Vivian asked about Briar. How is she? Elias smiled. Good. Currently obsessed with velociraptors. Very specific about which dinosaurs are the coolest. Vivian's expression softened. I'd like to see her again. Properly this time. Not as part of a contract. Just as someone in your life. Elias felt warmth spread through his chest. I'd like that too. She keeps asking about the pretty lady from the park. I think she'd be thrilled. How's the board treating you? Elias shifted the conversation to safer ground. Vivian's face lit up in a way he had never seen before, cautiously respectful. They're actually moving forward with challenging the will clause. Legal thinks they can have it removed entirely within 6 months. That's good. It's more than good. It's freedom. Vivian's voice carried a note of wonder as if she could not quite believe it herself. Donovan took a position at a competitor in Boston. He's gone. Elias felt a weight he had not realized he was carrying lift from his shoulders. How do you feel about that? Like I can finally breathe. Vivian leaned forward, her elbows on the table. I want to do this slowly, real dates, getting to know each other without a script or an audience. No expectations beyond seeing where this goes. Elias nodded. Slow sounds perfect. And I want to meet Briar not as someone trying to replace her mother, just as someone who cares about her father. Elias felt his throat tighten. She already likes you. Called you the lady with kind eyes. Vivian blushed, a flush spreading across her cheeks that made her look younger, more vulnerable. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me. You know what's funny? Elias leaned back in his chair. What the contract was supposed to be 12 months. We only made it 3.5. Vivian tilted her head. Maybe we were on the wrong timeline. What do you mean? Maybe we needed to stop counting months and start counting moments, the ones that actually mattered. Elias smiled. That's very philosophical for someone who runs a company with spreadsheets. Vivian laughed. I'm trying new things. Turns out there's life outside Excel and quarterly reports. When can I see you again? Vivian's question was simple but carried weight. Elias thought about his weekend plans. Saturday, Briar and I are going to the Natural History Museum. Dinosaur exhibit. I'd love that. Elias felt he needed to set expectations. Fair warning, it's loud kids and overpriced toy dinosaurs in the gift shop. Nothing fancy. Vivian's smile was bright and unguarded. Sounds perfect. Way better than another charity gala where everyone pretends to like each other and I have to make small talk about market trends. They stood to leave, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and painting everything gold. Outside on the sidewalk, they faced each other awkwardly, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. Vivian extended her hand for a handshake, then laughed at herself. That's ridiculous. We're past handshakes. Elias grinned and pulled her into a brief hug. She was stiff for just a moment, then relaxed into it, her arms coming up around his shoulders. See you Saturday. See you Saturday. Elias walked toward the subway, turning back once to see her still standing on the sidewalk, watching him go, a smile on her face that looked like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, Elias picked up Briar from the neighbor who had been watching her. She ran to him with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about the drawing she had made. On the walk home, she looked up at him with those too perceptive 6-year-old eyes. You look happy, Daddy? Elias squeezed her hand. I am, sweetheart. Is it because of the pretty lady? Maybe a little. Briar nodded seriously. I like her. She has kind eyes. Not like the people at the bank who look at us funny. Yeah, she does. Briar was quiet for a moment, her small hand warm in his. If she becomes part of our family, what do I call her? Elias's heart stopped. He knelt down on the sidewalk, eye level with his daughter. Whoa, let's slow down a bit. Okay, right now she's Daddy's friend. We're going to the museum on Saturday, the three of us. Briar's face brightened. Really, the dinosaur museum, really? But it's going to be slow, honey. We're getting to know each other. Okay. But I hope she stays. I don't want her to disappear like people do. Elias pulled Briar close, his voice thick. People come into our lives in different ways, sweetheart. Mommy didn't want to leave. Sickness took her away from us. But people who choose to stay, they make that choice every day. And that's what makes it special. You chose to stay with me. Briar's voice was muffled against his shoulder. Always. Forever. Cross your heart, Elias traced the X over his chest, their private promise. Cross my heart. They walked the rest of the way home, hand in hand. Briar's chatter filling the evening air with stories about dinosaurs and what she wanted to show Vivian at the museum. Elias listened and responded, but part of his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the woman who had started as a transaction and become something he could not quite name yet. That night, after Briar was asleep, Elias sat on the couch in the small living room. Dinosaur toys were scattered across the floor, evidence of the life he had built on his own. The apartment was not fancy. The furniture was secondhand. The walls needed paint. But it felt like home in a way the penthouse never had. He looked at the photo of Briar on the side table, her gap-toothed smile frozen in time. Then he looked at his phone, at the text thread with Vivian still open on the screen. His phone buzzed. Thank you for saying yes to the museum and to trying. Elias smiled and typed back. Thank you for asking, not as a boss or a contract. As yourself. That's the person I want to know. Another message arrived quickly. Briar asked what she'd call me if I become part of your family. That made me smile, and terrified me, and gave me hope. All at once, Elias's fingers moved across the screen. Welcome to Parenting Emotions. It's a package deal. Not a parent yet. Maybe someday. Maybe someday. One moment at a time. One moment at a time. I like that. Elias set the phone down and leaned back against the couch cushions. 12 months had been the wrong timeline for what they were trying to build. The contract had been a framework designed to keep them apart while appearing together, walls dressed up as connection. But maybe no contract at all was the right foundation. Because the best things, the things worth keeping, could not be written down and signed. They had to be lived day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. He thought about integrity, about what it meant to stand up when standing up cost you something. He thought about Jazz's words in the basement about machines breaking down when you ignored the warning signs. He thought about Vivian standing in the darkness during the power outage, telling him her fears without armor or pretense. He thought about Briar asking if the pretty lady with kind eyes would stay. The answer to that question was not his to give alone. It belonged to both of them, built together from honesty and risk and the terrifying possibility that maybe they deserved something good. Saturday morning arrived bright and cold, perfect weather for the Natural History Museum. Elias and Briar met Vivian at the museum steps at 10. Briar spotted her first and pulled free of Elias's hand, running up the stairs with the fearless enthusiasm of childhood. "You came," Vivian knelt down and smiled. "I promised I would. Did you know that the Tyrannosaurus Rex had teeth as big as bananas?" Briar's eyes were wide with the importance of this information. "I did not know that. I did not know. You'll have to teach me all about dinosaurs today." Briar grabbed Vivian's hand and started pulling her toward the entrance. "Come on. The fossils are amazing." Elias followed behind, watching his daughter and the woman who was no longer his wife, but might become something more, walking hand in hand up the steps. Vivian looked back at him over her shoulder and smiled, and he saw in that moment a glimpse of what the future could look like. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but real, built on choice instead of obligation, on honesty instead of performance, on the kind of love that grew slowly like roots finding purchase in rocky soil, strong precisely because it had to work for every inch of ground. They spent 3 hours in the museum, Briar lecturing them both on the difference between carnivores and herbivores. Vivian asking questions with genuine curiosity, Elias watching the two of them together and feeling something shift and settle in his chest. In the gift shop afterward, Briar begged for a stuffed velociraptor. Vivian bought it for her before Elias could object. "It's my first gift to my friend. That okay?" Briar hugged the dinosaur to her chest. "Thank you. You're the best." Vivian's eyes glistened. "You're pretty great yourself, kiddo." They got lunch at a diner near the museum, squeezing into a booth with worn vinyl seats. Briar sat next to Vivian, showing her the proper way to dip French fries in ketchup. Elias watched them across the table and thought about how strange and wonderful it was that his life had led him here. 6 months ago, he had been drowning in debt and fear. 3 months ago, he had signed a contract that should have been simple and became complicated. Now he sat in a diner with his daughter and a woman who had started as his boss and become his friend and might become something more if they were both brave enough to let it. After lunch, they walked Vivian to the subway station. Briar hugged her goodbye, making Vivian promise to come back soon. "I will. I promise. Cross your heart." Vivian looked up at Elias, saw him nod slightly, then traced the X over her chest the way Briar had taught her. "Cross my heart," Briar beamed. "Okay." She ran ahead toward the park, leaving Elias and Vivian standing on the sidewalk. "Thank you for today." Vivian's voice was soft. "Thank you for coming, for trying." Vivian reached out and took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "This is good. This feels right." Elias squeezed her hand. "Yeah, it does." She leaned up and kissed his cheek, quick and light, then turned and headed down the subway steps. Elias stood there for a moment, his hand still warm from hers, his cheek tingling where her lips had touched. Briar called from the park entrance. "Daddy, come, push me on the swings." That night, after Briar was asleep, Elias sat on the couch with his phone in his hand. He looked at the photo Vivian had sent Briar holding up her velociraptor in front of the T-Rex skeleton. Her smile gap-toothed and joyful. He saved it to his photos and typed a message. "She hasn't stopped talking about you. Says you're her favorite grown-up after me." The response came quickly. "She's pretty amazing. You did a good job, Elias." He smiled and set the phone down, not because the conversation was over, but because some things did not need words right away. They had time now. No contract counting down the days, no performance to maintain, just time stretching forward full of possibility. Elias looked around his small apartment at the life he had rebuilt from ashes, at the daughter sleeping in the next room who was his whole world. He thought about the penthouse on the 36th floor where he had spent 3 months learning that money could not buy the things that mattered most. He thought about Vivian, who had purchased his time but earned his respect and maybe slowly was earning his heart. He thought about integrity and choice and the difference between selling yourself and giving yourself freely. The words came to him then, not spoken aloud but settling into his mind with the weight of truth. 12 months had been the wrong contract, but maybe no contract at all was the right one. Because the best things, the things worth keeping, cannot be written down and signed. They have to be lived day by day in the moments between the grand gestures. In the quiet conversations in the dark, in the way someone looks at your child with genuine affection. In the choice to stay when leaving would be easier. In the courage to try again when you have every reason to protect yourself. Elias had sold himself once, trading time for money to save his daughter's future. Now he was giving himself freely, risking his heart for the chance at something real. The difference between those two things was everything. It was the difference between existing and living, between surviving and thriving, between playing a role and being seen. He had spent so long afraid of becoming his father, afraid that desperation would turn him into someone he did not recognize. But sitting here now in this small apartment that smelled like home, he realized he had become exactly the kind of man he wanted to be. The kind who stood up when it mattered, who kept his promises, who chose love over safety even when the outcome was uncertain. His phone buzzed one more time. Vivian's message glowed in the darkness. "I'm scared this won't work, but I'm more scared of not trying." Elias's thumbs moved across the screen. "Me too. On both counts. Then we're brave together, one moment at a time." One moment at a time. Elias set the phone on the coffee table and closed his eyes, letting himself imagine the future not as a finished thing, but as something being built brick by brick, choice by choice, between two people who had started with a lie and found their way to something true.